The celestial palace of the Nixery Empire rose from its crystal foundation like a living organism reaching toward the stars, its bioluminescent walls pulsing with the rhythm of thousands of inhabitants' emotional states. Dr. Elena Vasquez walked through corridors that seemed to breathe around her, their surfaces shifting from cool blue to warm amber as they responded to her calm, focused thoughts. The integration protocols are proceeding smoothly, she reported to her liaison officer through the communication device that translated her words into the musical tones of the Nixery language. Human neurological techniques are proving compatible with Nixery healing practices, though there are still significant cultural barriers to overcome. Elena's assignment as humanity's first xenobiological consultant to an alien royal court had seemed like the opportunity of a lifetime 6 months ago. Now, surrounded by the impossible beauty of organic architecture that defied human understanding of physics and biology, she found herself constantly amazed by how much both species could learn from each other. The palace's living systems created an environment unlike anything on Earth. Walls that could become transparent or opaque based on privacy needs, floors that provided perfect traction regardless of weather conditions, and lighting that adjusted automatically to support the circadian rhythms of multiple species. The Nixery had achieved biotechnological integration that human scientists could barely comprehend, let alone replicate. Dr. Vasquez, her liaison, Counselor Thailen, approached with the flowing grace characteristic of his species. Queen Lireleth has requested your attendance at today's medical consultation regarding Princess Kiralin. Elena nodded, though she suspected her role would be largely observational. The princess's case had been puzzling the royal healers for weeks, and Elena's suggestions, filtered through layers of court protocol and cultural interpretation, had been met with polite acknowledgement but little practical implementation. Has there been any change in her condition? Elena asked as they walked toward the medical wing. The princess remains sensitive to crowded environments. The royal healers believe it may be related to the early manifestation of her psychic abilities. Elena had observed Princess Kiralin from a distance during several court functions, noting behavioral patterns that reminded her of children with sensory processing disorders. The 6-year-old seemed to become increasingly agitated in crowds, seeking isolated corners where she could observe without being overwhelmed. The Nixery development of psychic abilities typically follows predictable patterns, Counselor Thailen explained as they approached the medical chambers. Natural mental barriers form gradually to protect young minds from overwhelming input. However, Princess Kiralin's abilities manifested suddenly and with unusual intensity. Like a neurological switch being thrown before the supporting infrastructure was ready, Elena murmured, making mental notes for her research files. The medical consultation chamber was itself a work of art, with walls that displayed holographic representations of Nixery physiology while responding to the emotional states of everyone present. Elena took her designated position in the observation area, watching as the royal healers examined the young princess. Princess Kiralin sat on the examination platform with the resigned patience of a child who had endured many such sessions. Her large eyes, luminous like all Nixery but somehow more intense, seemed to track movements and sounds that no one else could detect. When the healers approached with their psychic sensing equipment, the princess visibly flinched. The readings confirm elevated psychic sensitivity, the chief healer reported to Queen Lireleth, who observed from her position near the chamber's center. However, the princess lacks the natural filtering mechanisms that should have developed alongside such abilities. Elena watched the proceedings with growing concern. The child's body language suggested sensory overload rather than spiritual weakness, but her position as a human consultant gave her no authority to intervene directly. Your Majesty, Elena said during a brief pause in the examination, might I suggest environmental modifications that could help reduce the princess's stress levels? In human children with similar sensitivity patterns, we've found that controlled environments can significantly improve comfort and development. Queen Lireleth's attention turned to Elena with obvious interest. What manner of modifications? Reduced stimulation during peak sensitivity periods, structured interaction schedules, and perhaps most importantly, identifying individuals whose presence provides natural calming effects. The royal healers exchanged glances that suggested skepticism about human understanding of Nixery psychology, but Queen Lireleth nodded thoughtfully. Implement what modifications you deem appropriate, Dr. Vasquez. My daughter's well-being takes precedence over conventional protocols. As the consultation concluded, Elena noticed Princess Kiralyn watching her with curious intensity, as if the child recognized something different about the human observer who had spoken about helping rather than simply analyzing her condition. Elena's research into Princess Kiralyn's condition revealed parallels with human neurodevelopmental disorders that the Nixery healers had never considered. Working late in her assigned laboratory space, she compiled comparative analyses between human sensory processing disorders and the princess's documented symptoms. The manifestation patterns are remarkably similar, Elena recorded in her research notes. Sudden onset of enhanced sensory input without corresponding development of filtering mechanisms. In human children, this typically responds to environmental modification and structure desensitization therapy. Her recommendations faced the inevitable challenge of interdisciplinary translation. Concepts that made perfect sense in human pediatric neurology had to be explained through Nixery cultural frameworks that emphasized spiritual development over neurological intervention. Dr. Vasquez, Counselor Thylen visited her laboratory the following morning. The royal healers are curious about your assessment of the princess's condition. They request additional explanation of these environmental modification techniques. Elena pulled up holographic displays showing brain activity patterns in human children with similar conditions. In essence, we're dealing with a sensory processing system that's receiving more input than it can effectively organize. The solution isn't to force adaptation, but to provide structured support while natural coping mechanisms develop. And you believe Princess Kiralyn's psychic sensitivity follows similar patterns? The behavioral indicators are nearly identical. Avoidance of crowded spaces, seeking isolated environments, apparent fatigue after social interaction, all consistent with sensory overload rather than spiritual weakness. The palace's living architecture seemed to support Elena's hypothesis. She'd noticed how the walls dimmed around Princess Kiralyn during court functions, as if the bioresponsive systems recognized her distress and attempted to provide calming environments. The princess has been requesting private time in the garden chambers, Counselor Thylen mentioned casually. Away from the main court areas. Natural sensory regulation, Elena nodded. She's instinctively seeking environments where the psychic input is less overwhelming. Elena began implementing her modifications gradually, working within the constraints of royal protocol while advocating for changes that could help the princess function more comfortably. Reduced lighting during formal functions, smaller group interactions, scheduled rest periods in isolated chambers, small adjustments that respected Nixery traditions while addressing neurological needs. The most significant challenge came from the political implications of the princess's condition. Various noble houses viewed her unusual psychic development as either a sign of exceptional power that could threaten the established hierarchy or evidence of instability that could disrupt the succession. There are concerns, Queen Lireleth confided during one of their private consultations, about Kiralyn's fitness for eventual leadership. A ruler who cannot function in crowded court settings faces obvious limitations. Your Majesty, with proper support and gradual exposure therapy, there's no reason the princess couldn't develop full functionality. Human children with similar conditions often exceed normal development once their needs are properly addressed. Elena began observing the princess more closely during court functions, noting how Kiralyn's gaze often sought her out among the assembled observers. The child seemed to recognize something different about Elena's emotional signature. The calm focus of medical training creating a psychic environment that didn't assault her sensitive abilities. During one formal reception, Elena watched Princess Kiralyn become increasingly agitated as visiting dignitaries filled the throne room with their complex political thoughts and emotional agendas. The child's small hands began trembling as she tried to maintain her composure beside her mother's throne. The readings are approaching dangerous levels, one of the royal healers whispered urgently to his colleagues, monitoring the princess's vital signs through discreet sensors. Elena felt her medical instincts rising as she recognized the signs of impending sensory crisis. The princess needed immediate intervention, but royal protocol prevented Elena from approaching the throne area without specific invitation. Your Majesty, Elena said quietly to Counselor Thylen, the princess needs immediate environmental reduction. This level of stimulation could cause lasting psychological damage. But the ceremony continued, political necessity overriding a child's well-being in ways that reminded Elena why she'd chosen pediatric medicine over diplomatic service. The princess's distress was becoming visible to the entire court, yet protocol demanded that formal proceedings take precedence over individual needs. Elena made a professional decision that could end her career but might save a child's psychological development. Moving quietly toward the throne area, she positioned herself where Princess Caroline could see her, offering the calm, focused presence that the child's overwhelmed senses desperately needed. The princess's eyes met hers across the crowded chamber, and Elena saw recognition and desperate hope in that luminous gaze. The coronation anniversary celebration drew representatives from across the Nixri Empire, transforming the palace into a massive gathering that showcased the full scope of their civilization's political complexity. Elena watched from her designated observation area as nobles, military commanders, and diplomatic envoys filled the great hall with their presence and their overwhelming psychic emanations. Princess Caroline sat beside Queen Lyriletha's throne, her small figure dwarfed by the ceremonial regalia required for such occasions. Even from her distant position, Elena could see the tension in the child's posture as hundreds of minds pressed against her sensitive abilities. The princess appears to be managing well, Counselor Thylen observed, though Elena noted the strain in his voice suggested he was monitoring the situation closely. Elena pulled up discrete sensor readings on her personal device, watching biometric data that painted a very different picture. Her stress indicators are approaching critical levels. This level of psychic input could trigger a complete sensory shutdown. The ceremony proceeded with elaborate ritual precision as various noble houses presented tributes and renewed their oaths of loyalty. Each presentation required Princess Caroline to maintain formal attention, her developing psychic abilities involuntarily absorbing the complex political thoughts and emotional undercurrents that surrounded every interaction. The child needs immediate intervention, Elena whispered urgently to Counselor Thylen. These readings indicate neurological stress that could cause permanent damage to her developing abilities. But the royal healers, positioned near the throne, seemed focused on maintaining protocol rather than addressing the princess's obvious distress. Their traditional remedies involved adding more psychic pressure as they attempted to force Caroline's abilities into conventional patterns. Elena watched in growing alarm as the princess became increasingly pale, her small hands gripping the arms of her ceremonial chair as she fought to maintain composure. The palace's bioresponsive walls began dimming around the throne area, the living architecture recognizing distress signals that the assembled court either couldn't detect or chose to ignore. Your Majesty, one of the royal healers approached Queen Lyriletha during a brief pause in the ceremony. The princess's readings are unusual. Perhaps a brief recess would be appropriate. The ceremony cannot be interrupted for minor discomfort, replied the chief court advisor before the queen could respond. The princess must learn to manage her abilities in formal settings. Elena felt her medical training warring with diplomatic protocol as she watched a child suffering in ways that the adults around her either couldn't understand or couldn't address without violating political expectations. Princess Caroline's condition was deteriorating rapidly, her psychic sensitivity creating a feedback loop that threatened to overwhelm her developing neural pathways. The breaking point came during the climactic renewal of imperial oaths, when every noble house representative simultaneously projected their loyalty through psychic channels that traditionally strengthened the bonds between ruler and subjects. For Princess Caroline, the synchronized psychic output created an assault on her unprotected abilities that left her visibly trembling. Elena saw the exact moment when the princess's natural defenses began to collapse. The child's eyes widened with terror as her untrained psychic abilities were flooded with input far beyond her capacity to process. The royal healers rushed forward with their traditional interventions, but their psychic probing only added to the overwhelming sensory assault. She's going into complete sensory overload, Elena said urgently to anyone who would listen. This isn't a spiritual crisis, it's a neurological emergency. But the ceremony continued around the princess's silent suffering, hundreds of witnesses focused on political theater while a child's psychological development hung in the balance. Elena realized that no one in the Great Hall truly understood what was happening to Princess Kirillin, their cultural frameworks providing no context for addressing a condition that required immediate medical intervention. The palace's living walls began displaying distress patterns that reflected the princess's internal chaos, swirling colors and shifting geometries that made the entire chamber feel unstable. Some of the more sensitive Nixari began experiencing sympathetic discomfort, but the ceremony's momentum carried everyone forward despite the growing signs of crisis. Elena made a decision that would either end her career or save a child's sanity. Moving toward the throne area despite every protocol violation her action represented, she positioned herself where Princess Kirillin could reach her if the child chose to seek help from the one person in the palace whose thoughts provided refuge rather than additional assault on her overwhelmed senses. The princess's luminous eyes fixed on Elena across the crowded hall, recognition and desperate hope flickering in that gaze as she identified the source of psychological calm that her traumatized abilities desperately needed. The moment Princess Kirillin broke from her ceremonial position sent shockwaves through the assembled court that had nothing to do with psychic abilities. The 6-year-old royal heir abandoned every protocol of her station, running directly toward Elena with the desperate urgency of a drowning child reaching for a life preserver. The great hall fell into stunned silence as Princess Kirillin wrapped herself around Elena's legs, her small body trembling with relief as she found sanctuary from the psychic chaos that had been overwhelming her sensitive abilities. Elena immediately knelt to embrace the terrified child, her medical training overriding every diplomatic consideration as she recognized a pediatric emergency that transcended political boundaries. "It's okay, sweetheart," Elena whispered softly, using the gentle tone that had comforted countless children during her years in pediatric medicine. "You're safe now. I've got you." The princess's trembling began to subside almost immediately as Elena's calm, focused thoughts provided the psychological refuge that her overwrought senses desperately needed. Around them, hundreds of witnesses watched in astonishment as the royal child found comfort in the arms of a human stranger rather than seeking protection from her own bloodline. Queen Lireleth rose from her throne, her expression cycling through shock, concern, and something that might have been recognition as she watched her daughter's obvious relief in Elena's embrace. The implications of the moment were staggering. Princess Kirillin had chosen the safety offered by an alien over the traditional sanctuary of Nixari royal authority. "Your Majesty," the chief court advisor began urgently, "this breach of protocol." "Silence," Queen Lireleth commanded, her voice carrying absolute authority as she moved toward Elena and her daughter. "Can you not see that the child has found what our healers could not provide?" Elena looked up from comforting the princess to meet the queen's luminous gaze. "Your Majesty, Princess Kirillin is experiencing severe sensory overload. Her psychic abilities are receiving input far beyond her capacity to process. She needs immediate environmental reduction and structured support. And you can provide this support?" Queen Lireleth asked, kneeling beside Elena to study her daughter's transformed condition. "Yes, Your Majesty." The princess's mind resonates with the focused calm that medical training develops. "My thoughts don't assault her abilities, they provide the kind of psychological stillness she needs to recover." The assembled court watched in fascination as Elena demonstrated techniques for helping the princess regulate her overwhelming sensory input. Breathing exercises adapted from human anxiety management, gentle pressure that provided neurological grounding, and most importantly, the steady presence of a mind trained to maintain composure during medical crises. The princess's stress indicators are normalizing, one of the royal healers reported with obvious amazement. Dr. Vasquez's intervention has achieved more therapeutic benefit in minutes than our traditional approaches provided in weeks. Princess Kirillin lifted her head from Elena's shoulder to look around the great hall with wonder rather than terror, her psychic abilities finally experiencing the kind of filtered input that made social interaction manageable rather than overwhelming. "Mama," the princess said in her clear, musical voice, "Dr. Elena's thoughts are quiet. They don't hurt." Queen Lireleth's expression transformed as she understood the full implications of her daughter's statement. "You mean Dar? Vasquez's presence provides natural psychic shielding for your abilities?" Like hiding in the garden chambers, Princess Kiralin explained, but even better. Her mind feels safe. The political ramifications of the moment created ripples throughout the assembled court as nobles struggled to process the unprecedented situation. Their princess had found refuge with a human when her own species' healers had failed to understand her needs, challenging fundamental assumptions about Nixery's superiority and the natural bonds of bloodline loyalty. Dr. Vasquez, Queen Lireleth said formally, though her voice carried warmth that transcended royal protocol, I request that you accept the position of Princess Kiralin's personal guardian and instructor. Your understanding of her condition clearly exceeds our conventional approaches. Elena looked down at the young princess, who was now smiling with the first genuine happiness she displayed since Elena's arrival at the palace. Your Majesty, I would be honored to help Princess Kiralin develop her abilities in ways that enhance rather than overwhelm her natural gifts. The ceremony concluded with modifications that would have been unthinkable hours earlier, Princess Kiralin remaining beside Elena while Queen Lireleth completed the formal proceedings, the royal healers taking extensive notes on human approaches to neurological intervention, and the entire court witnessing a new model for interspecies cooperation in addressing complex developmental challenges. In the days that followed, Elena's work with Princess Kiralin established protocols that revolutionized Nixery understanding of psychic development. The princess flourished under structured guidance that respected her unique neurological patterns while gradually building the mental disciplines needed to function in complex social environments. You saved more than my daughter's abilities, Queen Lireleth confided during one of their regular consultations. You demonstrated that wisdom can come from unexpected sources, and that caring for others transcends the boundaries we create between species. Elena watched Princess Kiralin playing in the garden chambers, her psychic abilities now controlled and purposeful rather than overwhelming and chaotic. The child had developed the confidence that came from understanding her own mind, while Elena had discovered that some of her most important work would happen not in human hospitals but in alien palaces where children needed advocates who could see beyond cultural assumptions to recognize universal needs. Their relationship had evolved into something deeper than professional consultation. A surrogate mother-daughter bond that enriched both their lives while proving that the most meaningful connections often form when individuals have the courage to reach across impossible differences to offer help when it's desperately needed.